It gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, Mr. Chris Moon. Chris is a remarkable individual. He knows exactly what it takes to overcome adversity. Having lost his lower arm and leg whilst clearing landmines for a charity, within less than a year of leaving hospital, he succeeded to complete the London Marathon. This is just one example of his bravery and determination. And he told me last night that the reason he is here today is because he does feel passionately for the agricultural industry and for farmers. So we are really glad that you are able to be with us today. And therefore, without further ado, I'd like to welcome you onto the stage, Mr. Chris Moon.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's my honour and my privilege today to share some of my experiences with you. I'd like to share with you a philosophy for being resilient and for going the extra mile when we might not always feel like it. But as I begin, please be aware that you, ladies and gentlemen, are the stars of my show. So I am going to ask you to do a little bit of the talking. I started speaking literally by accident, because I lived through about 6 episodes that the experts told me categorically should have killed me. From that I have worked out we should be very careful who we listen to. I'm genuinely probably the luckiest person to be alive that you're likely to meet. I didn't survive by accident, I survived by choice and through choosing to not give up. Most of us in life have limits that go way, way, way beyond the point at which it gets difficult and tough and uncomfortable. And we have to believe in ourselves and go beyond the point at which we feel we can go no further. Now, as I begin, I thought you would find it interesting to guess who the 2 most sought-after speakers in my profession are, because you will never guess the first one. We could be here all day, and you won't guess that the first one's Tony Blair. No, and not in Europe, I might add. It's in the United States and in the Middle East. And if you want Tony, you've got to book him 18 months in advance. He's a 6-figure sum. The other guy, genuinely, who is phenomenal, is Bill Clinton. You want Bill Clinton, you've got to book him 2 years in advance, and he's a lot more than a 6-figure sum. And I said, if you remember, my first words were, it's an honour and a privilege to be here today. And when Erwin phoned me last night, I couldn't wait to come. So, I'm going to tell you a little bit of my story and then share with you some principles. So, I started life farming, lovely way of life. There was no land or money in my bit of the family, but by 21, I'd worked my way into a partnership. I was milking cows in Devon. My partner had a wonderful philosophy. He was in his mid-50s, and he said, we have to do the work of 2 men each. You can never be sick, and you can never be injured, because we've got to milk the cows twice a day. Great philosophy. One which I think actually helped me live through a whole load of things I should never have lived through, that discipline. Unfortunately, there was one thing that we hadn't realised and that he hadn't realised. He didn't look after his long-term health, and by his mid-50s, he'd literally worn his joints out. His knees and hips had gone. And I said to him, look, we can't go on. I worried about it for months. I think that worry is a condition that sometimes farming promotes. And I worried about this for months, and then one day I realised that I had to say something. So I said to him, look, I should go and do something else. We'll sell up. You can enjoy your money, farm in a much more relaxed way, have a small arable farm, which he did, and he lived happily ever after until he was 92. I love a story with a happy ending. Now, really interesting, because I still follow that part of the world where we farmed, and there was a farmer recently a neighbour who won £5 million on the lottery, and the newspaper went round to interview him, the local paper, and they said, what are you going to do with the money? And he looked at them and he scratched his head and he said, well, I should just keep on farming like my father did until the money runs out. Out of every disappointment, I have always found a bigger opportunity. And there will be one if we choose to look for it. And I decided I wanted to do something humanitarian, and the humanitarian thing I decided to do, being a Thatcher child, was join the army and learn how to kill people. So I went to the army. I had a wonderful time in the army. Of course, I'm joking. Nothing could be further than the truth. My grandfather fought in the First World War. My father in the Second. They taught me something. I'm indebted to them for knowing. And that is the mark of the individual. It is not what they do. It is what they would do if they didn't think they would be found out. So, during conflict, people will do the most terrible things unless they are held accountable. And so I decided to become an officer in the military police. I did an anti-terrorist role. I stopped people being blown up for 3 years on operations. I wanted to continue to do that, so I left and I went to work for a charity using my agricultural training, and I was clearing landmines and adapting agricultural machinery to speed the process up in Cambodia and in Africa. By the way, I was pretty good at mine clearance, found the very thing we were looking for. It's all about how you choose to see it, isn't it? By the way, I went to Cynhadledd. Anybody go to Cynhadledd? Yeah. Anybody else? You remember at the Ffermio Awards that girl screamed when I said anyone go to Cynhadledd? That was rather embarrassing because I remembered that scream. So, a lot of what we were doing was land use. An experience that I was even more fortunate to survive than being blown up happened in 1993. I was working in a remote border village. The United Nations had asked us to clear landmines in this border village, and they said that there was no way the Khmer Rouge could get anywhere near us. The Khmer Rouge, probably the most ruthless terror group in history. Their prisoner handling consisted of interrogation, torture, and execution. That was it. No concept of innocence or guilt. In spite of being given this guarantee of security by the United Nations, we were driving down the jungle when we were ambushed. It was only my second day in that minefield. We were held for 3 days. I was accused of being a military advisor. They started to interrogate me. On 7 occasions, they talked about executing us. On each occasion, it was possible for me to change the way they felt. I mentioned Bill Clinton at the beginning of my speech. I spoke before him a while back at a business conference, and he is one of the most charismatic people I've ever met. And I was talking away to him in the green room. Then we went outside to go get into the cars to go to the hotel for dinner. And as he walked outside, there was a line of 8 cars. He walked over to every driver. He shook his hand and said, "Hi, I'm Bill Clinton. Great to meet you. Thank you for doing what you do." Now, each of those drivers got into his car visibly 2 inches taller, with a huge smile on their face and a story that they will tell their grandchildren. And from Bill, what do we learn? Everything is about the way we make people feel. People will not remember what we say to them. They probably won't remember what we do, but they will always remember how we make them feel. And that principle enabled me to stay alive during the 7 occasions when they talked about executing us, because they understood me and I understood their ideology. And they, for those of you who remember that period of history, they had a really extreme Marxist peasant ideology. And the only people they liked were people who could work hard. On the first day, I could keep the vehicles moving through the jungle. They wouldn't drive on roads. They were afraid the local military would follow up. Because I could dig the vehicles out, because I could build bridges, and I could work harder than them, the soldiers decided they liked me. When I got taken in to be interrogated for the first time, the guards that took me in said, "Koat workala or na, he works very well." Now, 3 days later, when we came out of that jungle, the people, when we got back to the village in the middle of the night, because they believed that ghosts come out of the forest at night, and they had been told I would be executed, they believed I was a ghost, and they all ran away from me. Eventually, after 10 minutes, I got them to calm down, because I caught the old slow people at the back and made them feel my breath, and eventually, after 10 minutes, they finally believed I was alive. But they believed I was dead because no one had ever come back alive. I made one decision that I will share with you later that made the difference when I was first taken prisoner to it made the difference between life and death. So, '7th of March 1995, the day that I was blown up. Ironically, I was running a big program in Mozambique, and I was blown up doing the least dangerous thing I ever did. I was walking back up a safe lane where all the landmines had been removed. But the blokes couldn't find one for really complex technical and behavioural reasons. It was an area where they designed the mines to actually get the mine clearers. It's the first place in the world we'd experienced that. But against all the odds, I lived because I treated myself in that minefield. One of the reasons I lived was because I was very fit, and I'd always been a keen runner. Do you know, I was asked two questions at dinner last night. Where did I get my interest in running from? And where is the most terrifying place I've ever been? And the most scared I've ever been. And if I'm honest with you, it was the first Young Farmers Club disco I went to. No, it was. See, what happened was the youngest, newest member had to walk Big Beth home. Beth, it would be fair to say, Beth was good with both men and machinery. I really admired her, and she always wore these jumpers with the sleeves pulled up, and she had tremendously powerful forearms, and she was the most knowledgeable person in the club on tractors. Anyway, I was walking her home, we're going back up the street, and she says, "Here, you're a nice young man. Why don't you come in my house?" So I go, and she says, "Oh, I've got my key stuck in the door. Could you turn that for me?" So I go up, and she says it's stuck, and I just touch it, and it opens. But now I realise what's happened. She's in the hallway behind me, and there is no escape. I'm starting to hyperventilate a bit, very religious upbringing, and she goes, "Here, I'll tell you what, if you can guess my weight, you can come in and shag me. And then you can come round every Friday night and spend the evening with me, and we'll have a few beers and a chat and, you know, have some fun." I got a vacancy on Friday nights. I suspect that that's because Saturday was the rugby club. But anyway, so she says to me, she says, "Go on, guess my weight." And I thought the only option is, by now, I'm 16, I'm terrified. And she says, "Go on." I said, "Right, being rude is the only option." I said, "Beth, you're 96 stone. And she said, "That's close enough, you lucky thing, come on in." Yep. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where I got my interest in running from. But, do you know, now I am older and I am wiser. I regret not going round every Friday night. No, I do. Because just think how much I would have learned about tractors. I was told I'd be in hospital 6 months. I was actually there for 3.5 weeks. Why? 3 reasons. I worked really hard at getting well. I focused on the positive outcomes of my treatment, and I had a sense of humour. We have to be able to laugh at ourselves, because at the end of the day, we are all a bit ridiculous. We shouldn't take ourselves too seriously. We worry about a whole load of stuff we shouldn't worry about. And somehow we have to get that message across to the young people in rural communities. We worry too much. Problem shared is a problem halved. It's never as bad as we think it is. I was told I'd never run again, but I did my first marathon less than a year after leaving hospital. It was on day 2 in intensive care that I said, I'm going to do my first marathon less than a year after leaving hospital. That's my goal. And it was several hours later they sent a psychiatrist to come and talk to me. He was actually a nice guy. I really enjoyed talking to him. And apparently he left and he phoned my mum. She told me this when I got back to the UK. And he phoned her and he said, "Mrs. Moon, it's amazing. Your son has absolutely no psychological trauma. I've never seen anything like it. He's completely accepted what has happened to him. He's getting on with it. And I have to tell you, he is as sane as I am." And my mum, bless her, said, if my son is as sane as a psychiatrist, I'm extremely worried. So I did my first marathon, and I thought I was doing really well until I got to the 11-mile point, when I was passed by the fattest man in the world, dressed as a chicken. Once again, don't be the centre of your universe. You've got to be able to laugh at yourself. And I vowed somehow I would turn it to a positive. Because that's the challenge of life for all of us. How do we turn it to a positive? It truly is a gift we take for granted. I vowed that I would use it to motivate me, use my embarrassment to motivate me. And the next year, I'm proud to say, I got to the 23-mile point before the fat bloke passed me dressed as a chicken. To raise money for the charities I was involved with, I realised that if I could go further and faster, I'd be able to raise more money. So I became the world's first amputee ultra-distance runner when I did the Marathon de Sable in 1997, raising money for the Red Cross. And this is my favourite race title. It's called the Badwater Death Valley Ultra 135-mile Fun Run. Do you know, having done it 5 times, I can assure you the fun bit is finishing. It takes place in the hottest place on Earth at the hottest time of year. The principles that I'm going to share with you, treat them like the pick and mix counter. You know, if you go to Vue Cinema, they've got all these sweets in plastic containers, and you take your kids and you put them in these cups, and then you go and pay for them, and they ask for 30 quid. Treat my principles like that. Take the ones that work for you and use them. I ran the length of Cambodia. This was a principle the Buddhist monk taught me. About the 3rd day, he said, I'm going to come and walk with you for 30 minutes. You're doing a marathon a day, and during the heat of the day, I want you to suffer less. And you're a kind man, so I know you will slow down. And I was really annoyed that I had to stop running on the first time he turned up. Day 2, I couldn't wait to see him. And so I had my 30-minute walk, and as I was talking, he said, treat my philosophy like the pick and mix counter. Take the ones that you like, but use them and make them work for you. So that's my request, that you'll take something away and use it. There have been many times when I thought that I would die, and when you think you're going to die, your life does not flash before your eyes, as they say in the storybooks, but it is kind of like that. And the strangest thing is, I can remember being outside my body, seeing the paramedics work on me in South Africa, and I remember the whole thing, and I have never felt more alive. Perhaps there's an awful lot more to this than we realise. So, it's nothing to fear. Death is nothing to fear. It was like sinking into a warm pool, going to a familiar place. But that's understandable, isn't it? Most of us will be familiar with animals dying, and in some cases people, and the reality is there is a death mechanism. And it's not so bad. It's natural, isn't it? At some point we drift on. And death is nothing to fear. The only thing we should fear is not living life to the full, and giving in to the negativity and the badness that sometimes we experience. The challenge of life is rising above it. Because when you think you're dying, what you remember is the people you have loved and those who love you. And all you want is a little human kindness. And we shouldn't wait until the end of our lives to recognise that is the truth of life. The next question you ask is, what has been the point of my life? And you realise it's about people, but also you realise it's about living with passion and with enthusiasm. Because when you're dying, you remember the times when you gave in to the negativity, when you just went on a downward spiral, and that's a horrible, haunting place to be. And I urge everyone of having the privilege of sharing my experiences with, remember not to give in. Ask for help. Asking for help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness, and we all need help from time to time. So, reasons are like psychological rocket fuel. When I was dying, the reason I didn't die was because I focused on all my reasons for living. What are your reasons for living? The more reasons we can find for doing what we do, the happier we will be, and the better at it too. Find your reasons. I couldn't die because I passionately believed in my program clearing landmines, and I couldn't die because I knew it would be really bad for funding for my program. So, life is about being enthusiastic. And I did say, ladies and gentlemen, you were going to do some of the talking. So it's your turn now, and we have to do this quickly, because we haven't got much time. Time is our most precious resource. So I'd like you to now talk to the person next to you. Only 30 seconds. You only have to suffer talking to the person next to you for 30 seconds. And I want you to talk about what you are going to do to be more enthusiastic about your life, because no one can do that for you. And before you start this exercise, turn to the person next to you and say, hello, I like you. And it doesn't matter at all if you're lying. Just do it. Go! come back. The picture you can see there was the picture from my house in Cambodia, where I was running in the Midwest a big demining program. And it always fascinated me. And the reason it fascinated me is if you look at the pig's front left leg, there's a black rope that goes in front of the child, and there was a stick that had just been pushed into the ground. Now, I know from my farming background, the pig is the most intelligent of all farm animals. Now, this is a great audience to ask, who keeps pigs? They are intelligent, aren't they? Is that fair? Yeah, they are really intelligent. In fact, when I was in the army, there was a scheme to actually teach pigs to sense explosives because they were better at it than dogs. But in the end, the police cancelled it because I didn't want to sniff a pig unit. By the way, for those of you that put your hands up, thank you. It's a much better response than I got last week when I said, has anybody kept pigs? This lady in the front put her hand up and said, no, but I live with one. So, what fascinated me was why this pig didn't pull the stick out of the ground. Because clearly he's smart enough to do it. Clearly he's strong enough. Clearly he's capable. So why didn't he do it? And go and eat the vegetables and all the rice under the house. I could never understand it. I used to look at him every day. And then when they sent him to market, I began to understand. I replaced him with a little weaner, tied it to the same stick, little weaner, pulled and pulled for 2 days until he gave up. And then, as he became a bigger pig, every time that rope went tight, he never pulled it. And they untied it and tied it back on again so it didn't cut into his leg. And when he was a big pig, quite capable of pulling the stick out of the ground, the reason he didn't do it wasn't because he wasn't intelligent enough, wasn't because he wasn't capable. It was simply because he didn't believe that he could. Never underestimate the power of belief. It is the most extraordinary thing. So, giving you this principle from a different angle, who is it that does not finish an ultra-distance race? 135 miles in the hottest place on earth. The people who don't finish that race are not the most sick, not the most injured, not the most disabled. It is the people who do not believe they can go the distance. Never underestimate the power of our belief. So here's a question mark. How can you use the power of belief? Not just in yourself, but to encourage others to make the best of their lives. A technique that I learned to help me get through my first ultramarathons, because prosthetics were nothing as good 20 years ago as they are now. I can run a marathon 2 hours faster now because, and in spite of the fact that I'm older, because the standard of prosthesis has improved and it's got cheaper. My leg carbon fibre, 1,200 quid. It's a blade with a heel on it. There used to be 6,000, those high activity limbs. Incredible the way technology is advancing. And that's another thing maybe we should be asking ourselves. How can we use technology to our advantage? It requires us to think differently, but there are so many opportunities. Anyway, as I was going along, I had the worst feeling in the world because I didn't think I could get through the sand dunes. And I was 10 kilometres into a 24-kilometre day. And I looked at this sand dune, and it looked like a mountain to me. And I thought, I haven't got the energy to get up there. But when you're going through hell, don't stop. So I forced myself to the top. I had a drink, and I sat down, and I rehydrated, and I got my map out to make sure I was going in the right direction. And then I got up, and I thought, how do we solve our problems in life? It's through asking positive questions. So I thought, right, okay, I've got to go again. I've rehydrated. I got up. What was left of my right leg cramped up, left leg completely cramped. And I'm thinking, I can't move. And then I thought, okay, ask yourself a positive question. You don't feel right now that you can do 14 kilometres, but how far can you go? And I thought, right, well, I think I can go one step. That's all I can manage, one step. So, because I forced myself to the top, I took one step, then going downhill, gravity helped me, I had to take another and another. For the rest of that day, I said, one step, one step, one step, I can do this. And I finished the race that day, 14 kilometres beyond the point at which I knew I could go no further. Simply by having a personal positive pep talk. A mantra. What could your mantra be? I spent some time recently running a course for some people with terminal cancer. understandably, many of them get depression. And I was asked by this charity to do this, obviously delighted to. And I said to them, look, at the end of it, they were amazing. They took all the principles and they completely changed around to being positive about making the best of what they had left of their lives. And I said to them, look, is there anything you would like me to pass on to people I have the privilege of sharing my experiences with? And they all said the same three things. Firstly, don't get dragged down by the negativity that we all experience in life and the unpleasant and horrible things that sometimes people do to us. Don't let it destroy you. If you can, forgive people, move on, but don't let it eat away inside you. Second thing they said, be kind to animals and small children. And love. Don't be afraid to love. Spread a bit of sunshine into someone else's life. The power of a smile can never be underestimated. It is so important to spread a little sunshine and kindness. It is so important to smile, but not in a creepy way. So, the last thing they said was, tell people to be healthy, to look after themselves, physically and mentally. So you've got 30 seconds to talk to the person next to you. What are you going to do to improve your mental and physical health? And in my case, to improve my running, I've stopped drinking beer and I've replaced it with this lovely fruit juice called Cabernet Sauvignon. So, what are you going to do to be more healthy, psychologically and physically? Go! Please continue this conversation throughout the day and at lunchtime. And if you see someone you don't know, go up to them and say, what are you going to do to be more healthy? You don't need to say because you look a bit fat or anything like that. So, the reason that I never had a problem being blown up is because I force myself every day to be thankful for what I have. So I work a lot around the world. I'm privileged to travel around the world speaking and running workshops. But when I'm at home in the southwest of Scotland, in the middle of nowhere, this is what I do when I wake up every morning. I give my wife my normal good morning greeting. She gives me her normal good morning greeting, get off. Well, you know, I'm so lucky to have my eyes. I force myself every morning to remember how lucky I am to have my eyes, because I know so many blokes blown up in the same situation as me who lost their eyes. Flipping heck, I am so lucky to have my eyes. Do you ever take time to be thankful for the fact that you can see and hear and that you've got 4 limbs? And I am even more grateful for my left arm and my left leg than I was before. I choose to be thankful. And I am so thankful for the fact that I've got someone in my life who truly loves me, my Labrador. So, there is a lot, I do a lot of work with psychologists and psychiatrists, and there's a lot of research that backs up the power of gratitude. The happiest people in the world with the highest endorphins levels, endorphins, the chemicals that boost our immune system, give us a sense of well-being and peace. They're Indian gurus who have spent more than 50,000 hours in meditation, thanking God for all the good things in the world. Flowers, bees, you name it. But start with your eyes. Okay, you've only got 30 seconds to do this. I've only got a couple of minutes left. You've got literally 30 seconds. All the things you have to be thankful for in your life. Start with your eyes. Go. I said that I would share with you the one decision that I made when I was taken prisoner by the Khmer Rouge that made the difference between life and death. And that decision was a very simple one. I thought, what is my strategy for dealing with this? And I thought, right, I went to 6 different schools. I didn't get expelled, we moved a lot. Who is it that gets bullied at school? It's not always the new kid. It is the kid that looks like a victim. And I thought, right, no matter what happens, I will never assume the role of victim. I will never think like a victim. I will never look like a victim. And my way for dealing with that was very simply to say, look, I will never assume the role of victim. I won't challenge them aggressively. I will be calm and polite. Because I know that if I challenge them aggressively, I will sign my own death warrant. But I will never look like a victim and I will never feel like a victim. Many years later, I became friends with the commander who I persuaded not to execute us. And he said something that fascinated me. He said, thousands of people were brought before me, and I instantly knew that you were the only one who was innocent, because you were not afraid of me. So, most of us know what we need to do to be positive and resilient. So, maybe take a couple of principles away. What can you do to be more positive and resilient? Who can you ask for help? Because what I've learned is, the fun about doing an ultra-distance race is the people you share the journey with. So what can you do to form a support network? Why don't you form a WhatsApp group of like-minded people, or Twitter? And it's so important to ask for help. Now, we're very short on time, so if there are any questions, you get me on Twitter. Come and talk to me. I'll be here for the rest of the day. I'd love to hear your perspective on life. And I did promise the gentleman from Ireland one story about cattle. And the last story I'd like to share with you happened in a remote minefield in Cambodia when the village chief came over to me and said, the water buffalo have been fighting, they badly injured a man, we need to castrate them. So, got on the radio, got my mate, an Australian vet, to come to the village, tied the water buffalo up, gets out of his vet bag these terrifying implements, probably familiar to many of you, Burdizo castrators. Gets them out. Big rubber grips, big pincher-like jaws, adjustable stops set to 3mm to crush the male dangly bits. And then when the male dangly bits are crushed, the blood vessels are crushed, the gonads simply just evaporate and wither away. Madam, if you could stop smiling, I feel a lot more comfortable. Sorry, no, I can't tell you where you buy them. Anyway, so you're about to do this when suddenly on the other side of the village, there's a little old wizened water buffalo who comes across. And then the vet walks up to this little old wizened water buffalo, looks at him, and then a little old man comes over to the vet and he points at the castrators and he says, you cannot do this to the water buffaloes. I know what you are going to do, you cannot do it. And the vet says, why not? And he says, because you must understand truth of life, what go around, come around. If you do this to him, he come back in next life and do same to you. Scary thought. And the vet just looks at me and says, no, mate, problem is, what you're saying is true, but you've assumed the attitude of a victim, and you've put a negative perspective on reality, because what happened was, in the last life, he did this to me. Yeah, so, that brings me to my last point, ladies and gentlemen. Whatever life throws at us, however uncertain the future, we should never adopt an attitude in which we might allow ourselves to be crushed. So I wish you all a crush-proof future. Thank you.